Here we go with some more questions on the topic 1.1. So basically everything related to the intro of cells. So here we have multiple choice questions. These are real IB questions. I get them from the past papers, so really these are the best ones to practice to get used to what kind of questions the IB asks you. So let's just get started. What are stem cells? Stem cells. This is the last thing that you learn in this subtopic, stem cells. Now, is it A, specialized cells that can be used therapeutically? No. Why? Because stem cells are unspecialized. They are not specialized. It's like this. Let me show you here. These here are unspecialized stem cells. Stem cells, have the ability to become any kind of cell that it wants to. A cardiac cell, a liver cell, red blood cell, any cell it wants to. At this very moment here, it is unspecialized. But it can become specialized, right? So that's why this one is wrong. They are not specialized, they are unspecialized. But they can be used therapeutically. They can be used in medicine to help treat diseases like Alzheimer's and Stargardt's disease and other ones, right? So they are used therapeutically. B, surplus cells taken from the embryo. So stem cells are not necessarily surplus cells taken from an embryo. They can be taken from an embryo. They can be, because that's where we can find stem cells, but not necessarily, because there are other cells that may not be stem cells. So that's why B is incorrect. So it's not always true. C, cells that retain their ability to divide and differentiate. This is the answer, because stem cells have are unspecialized, like I said, because they are able to, in the future, divide and differentiate to become a specialized cell. So the answer will be C. So why not D? So this is one thing about IB, man. So these questions are going to have answers or words from different topics, so you may be confused. And this is a pretty good example here. D is talking about xylem and phloem and plants. This is topic 9, which you won't even learn about if you're standard level. If you're higher level, you'll actually get to this topic. So although you didn't learn about this yet, you're still able to do this question because you know what stem cells are. So this whole question would be easier for you by the time the final exams were to come, because then you would know about this and you would be more sure. But regardless, you'll still know that the answer is C, even though you haven't learned about that yet. Okay, which functions are carried out by all unicellular organisms? So now we get to a question that's about functions of life, right? We know that every living thing is made up of at least one cell, organisms like humans, like us, are made up of what? Billions of cells. So we are multicellular, right? Multicellular. So we know to be considered alive, you need to carry out all the functions of life, regardless or not if you are unicellular or multicellular. You can be made up of a single cell. There are some organisms that are only made up of one cell. We'll talk about that later. And there are other organisms that are made up of many cells, us, multicellular. But regardless if you're unicellular or multicellular, you are considered living, meaning you must be able to carry out all functions of life, all the functions of life. And they include these. Let me show you. These. Hi, Mr. Grin. Homeostasis, metabolism, response, etc. Okay? All of these are functions of life, meaning anything that is to be considered living must be able to carry out all of these. If they can't carry out all of these, then they're not considered living. So let's go here. A, growth, homeostasis, photosynthesis, response. So what's wrong with this one? The one that's wrong is photosynthesis. Not all living things or not all unicellular organisms need to be able to do photosynthesis, because by that logic, humans, creatures like humans would not be considered living, because we don't do photosynthesis. So there are other organisms like humans that are unicellular or living that don't need to do photosynthesis, right? So it's important to know photosynthesis can be done by some living organisms, but they are not required by all living organisms. So photosynthesis is wrong. B seems right. There doesn't seem to be anything missing here. C seems to be wrong, again, because of the same reason, photosynthesis. D is wrong because of ventilation. Ventilation is the action of inhaling and exhaling. Not all living organisms can inhale and exhale, especially if you're unicellular. You don't need to be able to have a mouth to inhale things and exhale things. That is not required. Therefore, the answer is B. Like, think about a plant. A plant doesn't have a mouth to inhale and exhale. Anyways, we're specifically talking about unicellular, which means a single cell, and it has the same properties as any living organism. Okay, here we go to an interesting one. You may have wondered why we had to learn. Remember when you had to learn about this one here, this paramecium, this organism. For some reason, your teacher taught you this, and you're like, oh, I'm not sure why I need to care about this. That is because questions pop up on it. See, here comes a question that is related to paramecium. So you do need to know about it. So remember, paramecium, as I was just talking about what a unicellular organism is, some organisms only consist of one cell. And a good example that you need to know is paramecium. This is the entire organism. Notice, it is only made up of one cell. Now, you need to know a bunch of structures of this paramecium, which I covered in the video, so here they are. And I put here their functions, right? So now in this question, they're pretty much pointing at a structure and asking you the function. So X here is this one here, this contractile vacuole, and it is responsible for homeostasis. If you don't know what that means, you better check out that video. But yeah, it's going to be homeostasis. And we notice that there's no other option here for homeostasis, so we pretty much know it's B. So it's interesting, this one, because if you know X or Y, just one of them, you'll get the question right, because you don't need to know both. Because, for example, say you didn't know X, so you went here and you're like, oh, I don't know what X is, but I know Y is the oral groove or the mouth, which is responsible for nutrition or feeding. Then you'd be like, oh, it's got to be feeding. There's no other one that's feeding, so it's got to be B. So this one is kind of easier than it seems, because you just need to know Y or X and you can get the question right. So the answer is B. Okay, so here we have, so notice how here I said the question paramecium refers to question 1 and 2. We're moving on to a different question now. So this is not the same question anymore. So which characteristic of stem cells make them useful for treating Stargardt's disease? So again, we just talked about stem cells before. Now remember that stem cells are able to treat diseases such as Alzheimer's and multiple sclerosis, which are diseases that kill nerve cells, your brain cells. And then there's Stargardt's disease, which is a disease that kills your eye cells, meaning you start losing your vision. Your vision, you can't see anymore, you get blind. And then there's another disease called leukemia, which is a disease where your bones make improper red blood cells or improper blood cells, because we know your blood cells are made from your bone. Now, stem cells are able to help these diseases because they can differentiate into any kind of cell. So if you inject the stem cell into the eye or into the brain, they can replace these dying cells. So that's what's so useful about these. So now they're asking, what characteristic of stem cells make them useful for treating Stargardt's disease? Again, that's this disease, the eye disease. They can differentiate into retinal cells. This is true. This seems to be the right one, because retinal cells is another name, a crazy name for eye cells. Eye cells. So they can differentiate these stem cells into these eye cells and help treat this disease. Okay, so we pretty much know it's going to be A. But let's read over the rest and see if there's any ones we can easily eliminate. So they are readily available from especially created embryos. No, they are not readily available because they're very rare, and it's a lot of ethics involved in getting it, because technically by taking stem cells, you destroy a potential organism, right? Because those embryos would have formed a human or an animal at some point, but now you're using them to treat a disease. So it's not easily available. They transport white blood cells to the eyes. No, that's not their function. They divide by binary fission to provide sufficient cells. No, mitosis, not binary fission. So the answer here will be A. But it was pretty straightforward from the beginning. You almost didn't even have to read the rest. But I think it's always good to read the rest just to confirm a little bit. Maybe that the question had a trick phrase in it or something that tricked you a little bit. So, important. Okay, last one here. Though a single nerve does not think, millions of them organized as a brain results in thinking. What kind of property does thinking represent? So what they're saying, I can use an analogy for you. I don't have the page here, but I'll just say it. An analogy. So think about a band. If you have one guitar player in a band, right? it makes decent music. You can make good music, but you can't make such a wide variety, complicated composition. You can't, right? Because only one instrument. But when you have many instruments, so you add the drum, you add the bass, you add singing and piano, now you can create a sort of an orchestra, a whole complicated, integrated composition, right? So it's the same thing with the brain. Our brain is made up of billions or millions of these nerve cells, Now, one alone cannot think properly. You need a combination of many of them that will collectively work together to allow you to be complicated and to solve solutions and think properly. And we call this idea of many things working together, many nerve cells working together, many instruments working together to make something more impressive. We call this emergent property. So your body, your whole body is essentially emergent because so many things work together. Your eye cells work together, your ear cells work together, and overall, you are this very complicated organism. So we call this property of many different cells working together in an organism emergent. So the answer is going to be D here. So anyways, this word I covered in one of my videos. So if you're unsure about it, I really encourage you to go check those out. So that's it for this video. So again, if you want more questions, feel free to email me. I have my email in many of the videos, so just go find it and email me, and I can give you more and more questions that you can do by yourself.